Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our How to Be a Peer Reviewer webinar, today focused specifically on clinical medicine journals. Today's presentation will be split into two parts. In the first, you'll hear from four of my colleagues at Sage about how to be an effective peer reviewer, and they'll walk us through the peer review process from start to finish. This will take roughly 20 minutes and will be followed by a question and answer session. To prepare for this, please drop your questions in the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. If you feel like there's anything particularly important, please like to upvote, and we'll run through the questions during the section, the questions that receive the most upvotes at the start of the Q&A. But first, I'd like to present our team. Today, we're joined by Jennifer Lovick, an executive editor in the Open Access Journals department at Sage. She received her PhD in molecular cell and developmental biology from UCLA and joined Sage Publishing in 2016. She's an executive editor for the Gold Open Access Journal, Technology, Cancer Research and Treatment. We're also joined by Hemi Malki, an executive editor based in Sage's London office. Hemi manages Therapeutic Advances in Neurological Disorders, a leading Gold Open Access journal in clinical neurology, and oversees peer review processes and training for Sage Open Access journals. Next, we have Michaela Christodoulaki, a managing editor in the Open Access Journals department at Sage. She's involved in editorial outreach, peer review, and decision-making for medical papers. We're also joined by Apollonia Rose, a managing editor in the Open Access Journals division at Sage. She is the deputy editor of Technology and Cancer Treatment, deputy editor of Technology and Cancer Research and Treatment. Her primary role is to oversee the peer review process for the journal, while also leading initiatives in editorial board development and special collections. And last, I'm Sean Scarsbrick, and I'll be moderating the first half of the webinar today. I'm a marketing manager on the author marketing team. I'm passionate about helping reviewers, especially those in the early stages of their career, to navigate the peer review process with ease and expertise. And now I'll pass it off to Jen.
Great. Thank you, Sean. So I'd like to start with a definition of peer review. Peer review is a process where scientists or peers evaluate the quality of other scientists' work. By doing this, the goal is to ensure that the work is rigorous, coherent, uses past research, and adds to what we already know. The process of peer review is an integral part of publishing one's research and absolutely essential to ensuring the quality of research published and added to the research record. Aside from the benefits the peer review process has for each publication, there are also significant benefits for the peer reviewer. The most significant is the service a peer reviewer provides to their respective field. Each time someone peer reviews, they are directly helping to improve the quality of the article, offering the author new insights into their research methods and results. Providing the opinions of fellow experts in the field offers support and further insight. It is also a way to keep up with new directions in the field and could be a gateway to an editor position. Additionally, there are benefits to reviewing in ways in which a reviewer can receive recognition. This includes recognition via Web of Science and ORCID, where a reviewer can keep a record of publications and show which journals they review for. Also, recognition can be shown with reviewer certificates and displayed as professional development experience on a CD. Sage Publishing also offers some additional benefits to reviewers in recognition for their service. These include a 25% discount on Sage books and free access to ebook products and Sage journals for 60 days. For more information on these benefits, they can be found at the reviewer rewards link listed on this slide. The best way to improve your writing is by reviewing papers, so is good professional development. People who provide good and timely reviews are also more likely to be invited to serve on an editorial board, more professional development. Next, I'd like to spend a moment sharing with you what the overall peer review process looks like and highlight the core role peer reviewers have. After a paper is submitted, it is checked for compliance with journal guidelines for things such as correct formatting and for fit with the journal's aims and scope. If it passes these checks, it's sent to peer reviewers. In most cases, peer reviewers are matched to a paper based on keywords provided in the paper to keywords provided by the reviewer if they've created a reviewer account, or to keywords in articles the reviewer has authored. Reviewers are invited to review, and once they accept the invitation, they will have access to the paper in their reviewer center in our peer review system called SageTrack. Once reviewers have assessed the paper and prepared comments for the editor and authors, They then make a recommendation of revision, reject, or accept to the editor in the system. The editor can then make a final decision based on the recommendations from reviewers.
There are times when it's best to decline an invitation to review. One of them is when the reviewer doesn't have the expertise to review the article. This can happen if they got matched with the wrong article because the journal didn't have the right keywords for them. If this was the case, the reviewer should notify the journal about why an article was outside of their expertise when they declined the invitation to review. Another time a reviewer might decline the review is when they do not have the time and they cannot commit to a specific extension. However, if the reviewer has a specific extension that they could work to, it's worth letting the editor know before declining. Lastly, you should decline the review if you have a personal conflict of interest with the research or the authors that would prevent you from delivering an impartial review. Examples of this include you have some financial stake in the research, or you expect you may cite or reuse much of the content in the article in an upcoming publication because it's of very similar topic of your own research. It is also important to not simply reject an article because you know the content really well and feel that you may have a conflict of interest. If you feel that there could be a potential conflict of interest, or you feel uncomfortable providing a review because you are too close to the topic, or you feel you may be tempted to use or cite the research in the article before it's published, let the editor know. The editor will then decide how to handle the situation. This ties into the larger issue of reviewer ethics, which we cover in the next slide. If you're unable to review, instead consider a colleague who can. This is the gift to the editors when reviewers decline, but also provide alternatives. Finally, if the reviewer has encountered a delay or another issue, or realize that they cannot review the manuscript that they initially agreed to review, we'd much appreciate it if the reviewer gets in touch with us rather than drop out, as this can cost everyone a lot of time. Next slide, please. Start. Many journals use double anonymized peer review. This means the authors do not know who the reviewers are, and the reviewers do not know who the authors are. This helps the journal ensure that the authors are not getting an unfair advantage or disadvantage because who they are, and the reviewers are comfortable providing candid reviews. If the reviewer learns the author's identities when reviewing for a double anonymized journal, for example, if the manuscript wasn't fully anonymized, then the reviewer should let the editor know right away. Definitely mention if learning the author's identities raises a particular conflict of interest for the reviewer. Importantly, even if the journal operates a single anonymized review process, the reviewer should under no circumstances contact the authors directly. All correspondence should be handled by the journal editor. The reviewer should also let the editor know if they have some connection to the study that impacts study participants' privacy. For example, if they know someone involved in the clinical trial under review. The reviewer will have access to unpublished research, and it is important to keep the content of that research confidential. The only exception is if the reviewer is working on a collaborative review with a colleague, which is something they should ask the editor before they agree to review. Lastly, reviewers recommended by authors are generally not allowed by Sage journals. There are only few exceptions. However, peer reviewers can suggest recommended reviewers for a manuscript if they're unable to review the manuscript themselves. Again, these suggestions should be sent to the journal editor.
We are next going to talk about our evaluation criteria and what reviewers should keep in mind when reviewing an article. At Sage, we have a phrase that we use, which is research done well, to describe the bar for publication. While the specifics may vary among fields, generally Sage is looking for clear, coherent contributions to the academic record with strong methodological rigor that can effectively serve as sound building blocks for future research. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about how to identify research that is done well. The first step in evaluating a manuscript is reading the whole paper. Do a quick read through to get a first impression of the manuscript you are reviewing. There are some features of the writing and structure that the reviewer may notice immediately. For instance, is the language quality good? The reviewer is not expected to copy edit or proofread the manuscript, but general comments on language quality would be appreciated by the editor. If the reviewer faces issues that makes the article difficult to read, please let the editor know. Secondly, assess if the authors used an academic writing style and whether the sentences are simple enough for readers to understand. Thirdly, check the manuscript for cohesiveness. Cohesiveness in a research article means good organization and overall flow of the manuscript and good transition between sections. The manuscript should clearly state the research questions and findings. It should have the correct use of headers. Lastly, every journal expects authors to write in a bias-free, inclusive language that is appropriate for a global audience. Authors are expected to take care when writing about gender, age, disability, neurodiversity, race, and religion. If the reviewer spots anything that violates this, it should be communicated to the editor. Next slide, please. Overall, there are 4 key things reviewers should look for while evaluating a manuscript. One is reporting guidelines. Reporting guidelines exist for most clinical study types and should be followed by authors when preparing an article. A good resource on reporting guidelines by study type is available on the Equator Network website. These guidelines are in place for enhancing the quality and transparency of health research. Next, an article should clearly demonstrate its contribution to the field. While not all journals require every article to make a significant or highly novel contribution, it is essential for the study's findings and limitations to be clearly stated. This clarity allows future research to build on the study. As a reviewer, you may be inclined to comment on whether the article fits the journal scope. However, determining the scope is the editor's responsibility. If you have concerns about the article's suitability for the journal, please direct those comments to the editor and not the author. Next, we expect research to have appropriate ties to the literature. Authors are expected to use a well-balanced reference list that are relevant and recent. If a reviewer notices material that is missing from the literature review and would give necessary context to the study, please let the editor know. For literature reviews, it is recommended not to suggest just your own or your colleagues' papers. Do this only if you have legitimate reason for recommending them, and state this clearly to the authors. Alternatively, you can simply suggest to the authors that they need to update the literature with more relevant or more recent articles. It is also good to consider global literature and expanding horizons beyond the existing literature referenced in the article to elevate the discussion on analysis. Lastly, a feedback that a journal appreciates are clarity with figure legends. Reviewers should be able to easily understand all figures. If they encounter any difficulty, authors should be advised to make the necessary improvements. So earlier we spoke about reviewer ethics. This slide has to do with ethical guidelines the authors should have followed when performing their study and writing their article. A reviewer should feel free to ask the authors questions surrounding the ethics of the study in their review and let the journal editor know if they have any concerns with the research ethics of the article they are reviewing. Every study that involves humans and animals require an ethics approval from the institutional review board of their institute. This approval grants authors the permission to conduct the study in a specified group of patients. If reviewers notice any breach of this or about the informed consent from the patients, this should be notified to the editor. If the reviewer has concerns about the privacy of the study participants, please let the editor know. This is especially important for online and open access journals, which can have a wider reach than printed or paywall journals. Lastly, let the editor know if a reviewer suspects any data or image manipulation. For example, a p-value that is too perfect or standard error bars that are too consistent, or if the figures with experimental results have unexplained anomalies. Reviewers may also have concerns about materials used in the study, for example, contaminated or incorrect cell lines, or perhaps the results seem inconceivable or too good to be true. Any concerns like these should be raised to the editor.
When it comes to looking at methods and data analysis, there's a number of key things to focus on as peer reviewers. The first is any flaws in the study design. Are there any clear concerns with the way in which the study was conducted? Is the study design consistent with similar studies in the field? Do the results and conclusions seem appropriate given the kind of study conducted? Is the material methods section descriptive enough so that the study could be reproduced? Are the statistical techniques relevant to the study? Are they standard for that kind of study? Are the materials and methods used for the study appropriate for the research question being addressed? If you're not familiar with a particular method, you can leave a comment to the editor saying that you're not able to comment on that part of material methods. Next slide, please. A lot of questions raised in analyzing the materials and methods section flow over into the results, discussion, and conclusion sections. Common questions to think about when reviewing these sections include: are the results presented in a way that best emphasizes the findings? Are these sections free of unsupported generalizations or assumptions? Are the conclusions appropriate for the study? And are there appropriate limitations and directions for future research? Also, it is important to ensure that figures accurately show the data that are presented in the results section. Lastly, consider the big picture questions. Did the study accomplish what it set out to do? Did the authors follow their original hypothesis? Did they follow their own methods, and does this follow through to the stated conclusions? Remember, not all studies yield positive results. They may also have null or negative ones. Do not recommend to reject the paper because it didn't have any positive results. As you can see, there are a lot of things to think about when reviewing an article. By breaking down the review into sections that match the structure of the paper, as a peer reviewer, you can thoroughly check all parts of the article and provide thorough feedback to the authors. Next slide, please. Elements of a good review report include a turnaround time that is timely. As a peer reviewer, you could email the journal if you require additional time to complete your review, for example. Good assessment of the quality of the science, data, and images. Easy to understand, so it's written in a way that it is easy to read. Substantial comments presented in a logical order. Provides an overview of paper's suitability for publication, specifies edits that are needed, highlights strong points alongside weaker points in the manuscript, and authors of the manuscript that are to be accepted as recommended by the peer reviewers should also be presented with constructive comments about their work. Include the reasons why you think the manuscript is good. Focus on what's good about the methods, the results or conclusions, and what you think about the overall quality of the manuscript that makes it good to accept. Next slide, please. The tone of the review should be helpful, positive, and constructive. Keep in mind that authors may be non-native English speakers. A review should be clear and specific. Avoid using strong punctuation like exclamation points or words in all caps that don't need to be as such, that can make a review appear aggressive and intense. Review comments are seen by both editors and authors, so be mindful of word choice and phrasing. To be invited again by an author, writing a well-throughout review goes a long way. Comments to authors can be organized as major and minor comments. Major comments are generally suggestions or questions for the authors that will require additional experiments or a significant amount of rewriting. Minor comments are generally simple questions or suggestions that can be addressed quickly. Keep in mind the question of whether or not the manuscript is readable and is something that can be later fixed with copy editing. There is also the option to send separate comments to the editor. Take advantage of the separate comments to the editor section to give more candid or high-level feedback, for example, comments around scope or appropriateness of study questions. You may be tempted to make judgments on the scope of a journal, but this is at the discretion of the editor, so please keep this in mind. This type of comment is more appropriate for the editor, not the authors. The manuscript that reviewers see is a system-generated PDF that includes numbers. It's really helpful when reviewers reference these line numbers, so the authors know exactly where they need to revise the paper. Your decision should be honest and constructive. If you think an article should be rejected, please select that. Do not select major revision because you feel bad for the author. The journal editor will appreciate your honest evaluation of the manuscript and will make an appropriate decision. It's important to talk about what to avoid in a reviewer report. Lack of details. As previously stated, a good review provides constructive feedback to the authors, even if the recommendation is for the paper to be accepted. No justification of the recommendation made. A recommendation that doesn't match the comments. Descriptive with no evaluation of the content. Asking authors to cite the reviewer's papers with no justification. Please note that recommendations for citing studies by peer reviewers are allowed if they would add to the content of the manuscript. However, a good review report should not only contain these. Negative or aggressive tone. Do not rush through the review process. If you expect papers to be polished, the comments should also be polished themselves. The decision recommendations should only be included in the confidential comments to the editor section and should not be shared with the author.
So, now that you know what to look for when peer reviewing, how can you volunteer to review? There are two major ways a reviewer can start the journey of becoming a volunteer. The first is to create an account in the journal's peer review site. Make sure to regularly check email address that you are using when you register. An institutional email address would be preferred. Create or add your ORCID ID, include your full affiliation, specify the degree or degrees, and choose the appropriate salutation. Make sure strong keywords that best illustrate your research expertise are included. Examples of good keywords and those to avoid are shown on the right. Good keywords are generally those that are descriptive, but not too niche to allow you to get matched with a manuscript that is relevant to your expertise. Methods keywords can be very useful to facilitate the matching process. The second way to become a volunteer reviewer is by connecting with the editors. A reviewer may consider reaching out to the editors of the journal directly via email. Many editors have their email addresses on the journal website, or by creating a Web of Science account. Many journals also have volunteer reviewer programs that you can apply to join. For example, many Sage Open Access journals encourage applications for their editorial review boards. Next slide, please. If you are a more junior researcher, such as a PhD student, and would like to conduct a joint review with a mentor or supervisor, reach out to the editor before conducting the review. The decision to allow joint reviews is at the editor's discretion. If you have been invited to provide a review and do not have the time, do not just hand off the task to a more junior colleague to provide the review on your behalf. Let the editor know and they will decide how to proceed. It is important to ensure that the reviewers receive credit for the work done. Next one, please. For those who want to learn more about how to conduct a peer review and put together an effective review report, Sage offers a number of resources in the Sage Journal Reviewer Gateway. Our How to Review Articles page, downloadable reviewer's guide, and how to conduct a peer review video offer guidance on the elements of a peer review and how to assess a manuscript. Sage also partners with Web of Science and recommends their Web of Science Academy, which is linked onto the Reviewer Gateway. The Academy is free of charge formal training course, providing researchers with the skills, connections, and experience required to become an expert reviewer, with learning modules, practical experience writing reviews, feedback on reviews, and a certificate and a badge on a reviewer's Web of Science profile upon completion of the course. For those who would like to learn even more about peer review, Sage offers a number of additional resources on the Sage Journal Reviewer Gateway. Reviewers will find a video on how to become a peer reviewer, as well as peer reviewer ethics video with information about ethics and reviewer responsibilities. Reviewers can also visit the Committee of Publication Ethics, also known as COPE, website to review their suggested best practices for peer reviewing. This is called the COPE Ethical Guidelines. A great way to learn is to see examples of peer reviews. Some journals follow the open peer review model where the author can see the comments made by reviewers for a particular article. Reviewers can also look at comments made on preprint articles on many preprint servers. Again, to gain even more experience reviewing, a reviewer may consider the Web of Science academic training course, which provides in-depth training.
Lastly, we'd like to thank reviewers for taking the time to support fellow researchers. Reviewing is a critical process, and reviewers help to protect the integrity of the academic record, elevate the quality of the work they review, and challenge their peers to higher standards of research and scholarly communication.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Jennifer, Hemi, Michaela, and Apollonia for that presentation. Before we move on to the Q&A, I wanted to flag that Sage has a dedicated gateway that houses all of our peer review resources. If you have any questions about where to begin, please do consult the gateway, and I will send a link to that after the call in our follow-up. And now we're going to move forward into the Q&A portion of our webinar. So I ask that throughout this, if you have any questions that you would like our panelists to address, please continue to post them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I see a bunch of good questions coming through that I've been responding to some of them, but I think we have a lot of good ones to come as well. Just as a heads up to everybody who's asking the questions about slides and certificates, I'd like you to know that everyone attending today will receive a copy of our slides. And also we will send out a certificate of attendance to everybody who is joining us live. So these might come to you within the next few weeks, but they are coming. And if you don't see it, definitely check your spam folder to make sure it's not buried somewhere in there. So now, to pass it off to my panelists, I've got a good question for you. So we have a question about conflict of interests. So can you please explain why you should flag a conflict of interest even though peer reviewers remain anonymous?
Hi, thank you. I can answer this question. Yeah, so the practice of disclosing conflict of interest is actually to protect the integrity of the peer review process and to ensure that all research is evaluated fairly without bias. So if you have any personal, financial, or professional connection to the authors or the work that you are reviewing, you could actually unintentionally influence the judgment. So by disclosing any potential conflicts of interest to the editor, the editor can actually make an informed decision whether or not the editor should consider you as a reviewer or unassign you to the manuscript.
Thank you, Apollonia. All right, we've got another good question here. What are the general requirements to accept junior reviewers as, junior researchers as reviewers? Is there a cutoff for the number of papers?
Most journals would expect the reviewer to have an MD or PhD and also have some published papers. The cutoff, if there is one, it will vary by journal. This is where the journals will have autonomy to set the caps. Or typically, the most common cutoffs that I've seen are somewhere along 5 to 10 published articles. There may be some flexibility to this. However, for example, if somebody has 3 or 4 first-order publications demonstrating that they have a deep expertise in the field, they made really significant contributions, they could be considered competent enough to review an article that is similar in terms of methodology and research topic, even if they might not exactly meet that cutoff. If you're somebody who has published fewer papers, but you are keen to review, I would definitely contact the editors and ask what kind of criteria that specific journal has, explain what kind of contributions you have made. They may also have a way of getting you to do joint reviews first, just to make sure that you know what you're doing. But there's no hard and fast rule.
Thank you, Hemi. All right, I've got another good question. So how do I get invited to review for a journal? Wondering if any of you could take that question.
I can answer that, or Hemi can also. So the best recommendation I have for how to get invited to review for a journal is to identify the journal or journals you feel are, best fit based on your research expertise. They publish papers that are in your area, things you'd feel comfortable reviewing. You can also, as was mentioned in the presentation, contact a lot of editors directly. Contact information's on journal websites, and ask about signing up to review. Sometimes it's nice to start to have that connection. Usually, though, what editors will ask then is, go create, a reviewer profile account in the peer review system. And that's actually really critical for editors to be able to find someone to actually invite to review. So completing a full profile, putting keywords that best match in your area of expertise. Editors rely on that pretty heavily to find people to review. And also just, making sure your profile is as complete as possible for whichever journal or journals you're interested in. Each journal is a little different. So, but the most critical part, I would say, is making sure your profile is accurate and reflects the kind of research you feel comfortable reviewing.
Thank you, Jen. We've got a good question in the chat from Usama, who's asking, does Sage Journals have a general reviewer in training program?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not every journal will have one. So again, if this is something that you're interested, I would again really recommend getting in touch with the journal directly. Some journals have these Rising Stars programs, and other journals might be able to match you with, for example, an editorial board member or somebody else who can kind of help you get started with the process. The other possibility that you might have if you want to volunteer would be to ask if you have a mentor, supervisor, a more senior colleague that would be able to do joint reviews with you first while you're gaining that experience. Again, if you're interested, I would really recommend getting in touch with the Journal of Interest directly because the policies will vary.
Thank you, Hemi. Another question we get frequently is about review extensions. So obviously everybody on this call, work is busy, research is busy. What happens when you can't meet a deadline? How can you get an extension? Michaela, can I pass this off to you?
Yeah, if you have agreed to complete a review, but now you're busy or you don't have time and you'd like an extension, I would recommend emailing the editor directly or the journal, the email address that you originally received the email from to complete the review and let them know that you would like an extension and how many days that would be. Please keep in mind that the review should be timely. So an extension of a week would be possible, but not, for example, 2 months. So keep this in mind.
Great, thank you, Michaela. So one of the big hopes for us after this webinar is that everybody feels very empowered to do reviews and to do a great review. So a question here: if I do a really good review, will I get invited again?
Shall I go? So probably, almost certainly, yes. We are always looking for people who do a really good job. Of course, this will depend on your expertise and the journal scope. So we need to find people who have really like the methodological expertise and have the topical expertise to really be able to assess this manuscript. But if you do meet those criteria and you have provided good reviews for the journal before, yes, almost certainly.
Thanks, Hemi. We see a good question here from Zachariah, and this is something that was discussed briefly in the call, but is there a specific qualification one needs to become a reviewer?
Most journals would require an MD or PhD and some published articles in the journal's topic or the manuscript's topic. Again, it's really hard to say this is like the exact rule that every single journal in the world has, because this will vary a little bit by journal and by the discipline. But in most cases, we would expect an MD or PhD and some published papers in that topic area using the similar methodologies as the paper that the reviewer is assessing, so that they can really assess the soundness of the science and the methods.
Thank you, Hemi.
I would just wanted to add something else. So, for example, if you're a graduate student, you're still doing your PhD, you can still contribute to being a reviewer. So this, how you can do is be a joint reviewer with your supervisor or PI. Yeah, and that way you can submit a review to the journal.
Yes, good point, Apollonia. Thank you for that. I think we've got one more question here. And this one was, does the journal provide a certificate of review for accepted papers, or is there a formal way to acknowledge a reviewer's contributions?
Yes, we do. We do provide certificates for the peer reviewers that have completed the review. If they can reply to the editor or the journal that invited them, that they would be interested in having a certificate, we can provide that for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Michaela. And I think that with that, we've come to the end of our Q&A. So first, I'd like to thank everybody who's joining us live today for all of your very excellent questions, very helpful questions. And a huge thank you to our panelists, to Hemi, Apollonia, Michaela, and Jennifer for all of your expertise in the subject area. To everybody joining today, again, we will follow up with the slides with a certificate of attendance. And we have a lot of webinars planned for the rest of the year. So next week, we have a webinar in our How to Do Research or Get Published series about how to promote your article and impact policy. And in the new year, we will see a lot of additional webinars. So we would love to see you in a future webinar. But in the meantime, please take care and good luck reviewing.